They firmly believed that their tanks could not be defeated. The Type 95 Ha-Go had demonstrated its effectiveness against Chinese troops, prevailed over Soviet tanks at Khalkhin Gol, and played a key role in comprehensive victories throughout Malaya and the Philippines. Japanese tank operators were certain these light tanks stood at the forefront of armored vehicle design, being ideally tailored for combat in the jungles and islands of the Pacific. They had overwhelmed every foe they faced. Their assumption, however, was mistaken. The account of how they came to realize this does not start with a loss, but with a confidence rooted in years of triumph. The Ha-Go was far from an accident in its creation. It originated from deliberate military planning begun in 1933, once the Japanese Imperial Army identified a significant deficiency in armored strength. Japan's primary battleship, the Type 89 medium tank, was only capable of reaching 15 miles per hour. While this speed sufficed for advancing alongside infantry on foot, it fell far short of the requirements for the fast-paced mechanized combat they aspired to. Japanese strategists paid close attention as other countries fielded quicker and more agile armored vehicles. Their goal was a tank that could move at 40 miles per hour alongside motorized troops transported by trucks, traverse the terrains of Manchuria and China, and be manufactured in numbers their factories could support. The Army Technical Bureau set forth its requirements in July 1933. The planned tank would have a weight near 7 tons, carry a 37 mm cannon, reach 40 km per hour, and possess enough protection to withstand small arms and machine gun bullets. Most importantly, its construction and upkeep would be straightforward. The contract was awarded to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Engineer Tomiyahara, already recognized for his work on the Type 89, undertook the project. His most significant contribution was the bell crank suspension, an uncomplicated yet efficient mechanism that would become the norm for Japanese tanks through the following 10 years. By June of 1934, Mitsubishi had finished building the initial prototype. Military observers were impressed by the prototype during field evaluations carried out in Manchuria and at test grounds in Japan. The tank demonstrated rapid movement, achieving speeds of 45 km per hour on paved roads and sustaining 25 to 30 km per hour across rough terrain. Its agility was notable, exhibiting a turning radius that seemed unachievable for a tracked vehicle of its proportions. The HAR suspension, marked by its unique bell crank setup, effectively absorbed impacts and permitted the tank to navigate rugged ground that would have halted other machines. Its mechanical dependability was assured by a Mitsubishi 6-cylinder air-cooled diesel engine generating 120 horsepower at 1,800 revolutions per minute. Japanese engineers took special pride in the diesel engine, as it rendered the tank less prone to fires than vehicles powered by gasoline. Diesel fuel was also more commonly accessible across Japan's territories, especially in regions such as Manchuria and Southeast Asia, where gasoline availability was restricted. On its internal fuel supply of 34 gallons, the engine could function for 8 to 10 hours, affording the tank an operating distance of about 130 miles on roads. Testing identified some issues. The suspension system was prone to severe pitching on uneven terrain, which made it nearly unfeasible to aim accurately while moving and led to fatigue among the crew. This was remedied by installing braces to link the bogie pairs, a solution that came to be called the Manchurian suspension. While this adjustment alleviated the problem, it did not fully resolve the harsh ride that would distinguish the Ha-Go during its operational period. In 1935, during an Army Technical Bureau meeting, the Type 95 was officially proposed as the prospective primary tank for mechanized infantry units. Representatives from the infantry expressed reservations. They maintained that 12 mm of armor was too little for a tank tasked with backing infantry attacks against fortified defenses. Countering this, the cavalry delegates stated that the increased speed and maneuverability made up for the thinner armor, and that the tank's armament was sufficient for its specified function. After a lengthy discussion, the infantry contingent consented to the design. The Type 95 Ha-Go received formal acceptance. Its designation was derived from the Japanese imperial calendar, signifying the year 2595 since Japan's mythical founding. Only the final two digits were selected for the type number. Mitsubishi started production in 1936. The Hargo qualified as a small tank. Its dimensions stood at 4.38 meters in length, 2.06 meters in width, and 2.13 meters in height. In U.S. measurements, that meant 14 feet 4 inches long, 6 feet 9 inches wide, and just under 7 feet high. An individual of ordinary stature could see over the turret. The standard weight was 7.4 tons, reaching up to 8.1 tons with the addition of crew, fuel, and munitions. The armor was considered thin by any measure. It was 12 millimeters at the thickest areas on the turret and upper hull, 9 millimeters on the top and bottom, and just 6 millimeters in certain less vital spots. Japanese engineers judged that this thickness would be enough to stop bullets from rifles and machine guns at standard combat ranges. Their design was tailored to anticipated adversaries' Chinese troops with minimal anti-tank weapons and light Soviet armored vehicles. The tank's interior was confined. It accommodated a crew of 3. The driver occupied the front left of the hull, his vision limited to a small viewing port and periscope. To his right sat the hull machine gunner, armed with a Type 97 7.7 mm machine gun mounted in a ball fixture. The solitary commander was positioned within the turret, standing on the hull floor since there was no basket beneath for support. This role of tank commander was arguably the most demanding in the Imperial Japanese Army. He was responsible for commanding the tank, giving directions to the driver and, when radios were accessible, maintaining communication with the other tanks. Just 1 out of every 4 tanks was equipped with a radio set, requiring the remainder to depend on visual signals for coordination. He needed to operate the primary weapon, the Type 94 37 mm cannon that could fire both armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. He was also tasked with loading this weapon, a challenging feat considering the tight quarters and the necessity to stand while performing this action. Furthermore, he had to handle a secondary machine gun that was positioned at the back of the turret, oriented to the right rear, approximately at the 5 o'clock mark. American tank crews, who later inspected Ago tanks they had captured, found it remarkable that anyone could carry out their role proficiently in such a setting. The Japanese tank commander lacked a seat inside the turret. He remained standing during combat, exposing his head and shoulders if he opened the hatch to improve visibility, or otherwise being restricted to a confined area with poor views if the hatch was closed. Moving the turret required turning a manual crank, which demanded substantial physical strength. The available space was so limited that effective fighting was difficult. Yet, when used in its designated capacity and against the adversaries it had been built to combat, the Hargo demonstrated excellent performance. The tank was first employed in major combat operations in China beginning in 1937, against Chinese military units that possessed almost no armored vehicles and very few anti-tank weapons. The Hargo proved overwhelmingly effective. Its 37 mm cannon was able to demolish defensive positions and suppress enemy infantry fire. Its machine guns were lethal against soldiers caught out in the open. Its agility enabled Japanese forces to exploit breaches in enemy lines and chase after withdrawing troops. The crews operating these tanks in Japan gained both battlefield skill and assurance. They developed their expertise in circumstances where their tanks far surpassed any opposition. This record of victory fostered an unsafe belief that the Hargo was a genuinely competent tank and not just a platform tailored for narrow operational circumstances. That belief faced a major challenge at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol in 1939, where Japanese troops engaged with Soviet forces along the border with Mongolia. In this setting, the Hargo was up against formidable adversaries. The Soviet BT-5 and BT-7 tanks were armed with 45 mm guns that possessed superior armor penetration capabilities compared to the Japanese 37 mm gun. The Soviet vehicles also boasted thicker armor protection, which made head-on encounters difficult for the Hargo tanks. The fighting was vicious. On July 2, 1939, the Japanese 3rd Tank Regiment, using mostly Type 95 tanks, launched an attack on Soviet defensive lines. This initial attack had some achievements due to surprise and bold tactics. Japanese tank crews succeeded in destroying 32 Soviet tanks and seizing 35 armored vehicles. However, the Soviet counter-offensives that followed in subsequent days exposed the weaknesses of the Hargo. Soviet weaponry was able to pierce the Hargo's armor at distances where the Japanese guns could not seriously harm Soviet tanks. By the conclusion of the Khalkhin Gol operation, Japanese forces had lost many tanks. The implications were evident to those who analyzed events. The Hargo could not compete with the most current Soviet armored vehicles. Its thin armor and less powerful armament were inadequate for tank-on-tank warfare against equal opponents. Nonetheless, these findings were not fully taken to heart. The Japanese High Command chose to prioritize improved tactics and better crew training instead of focusing on a complete overhaul of their armored vehicle designs. The conflict in China persisted, and within that theater, the Hargo continued to prove its value. When hostilities erupted across the Pacific in December 1941, Japanese armored units achieved impressive victories in Malaya. Hargo tanks traversed landscapes that British leaders deemed impassable for armored vehicles. They advanced through rubber groves and jungle paths, providing crucial support for the swift Japanese push down the peninsula towards Singapore. British troops, having failed to deploy significant numbers of armored vehicles in Malaya, found themselves unready for this agile threat. In the Philippines, Hargos disembarked with the invasion forces and aided Japanese infantry maneuvers. On December 22, 1941, to the north of Damortis, Type 95 tanks confronted American M3 Stuart light tanks in what is remembered as the inaugural tank engagement involving U.S. forces in the Pacific. Each vehicle carried 37 mm cannons. The M3 boasted superior armor thickness, with 32 mm on the turret sides versus the Hargo's 12 mm protection. Nonetheless, in the close-quarters jungle skirmish, the Japanese managed some achievements, destroying an M3 in the opening clash. These initial triumphs bolstered Japanese assurance. As seen through their lens, the Hargo was functioning precisely according to its intended purpose. It was agile, dependable, and effective at backing up infantry actions across a range of environments. Tank operators placed their trust in these vehicles. Commanders depended on their armor, and when the directive arrived to defend Saipan, the Japanese transported their tanks without doubting their suitability. Saipan differed from previous encounters. Situated in the Mariana Islands, this landmass was of immense strategic importance, lying only 1,250 miles from Tokyo. Should Americans seize Saipan, their B-29 bombers would be able to strike the Japanese mainland. Japan's leaders understood this reality. They reinforced Saipan with about 30,000 soldiers, nearly twice the figure U.S. intelligence anticipated. Among those stationed there was the 9th Tank Regiment, commanded by Colonel Takashi Goto. The regiment was supplied with 44 tanks, combining Type 95 Hargos and the somewhat larger Type 97 Chia mediums. The Chias had more powerful 57 mm weaponry, but still retained the light armor typical of Japanese armored vehicles. These tanks composed a sizable armored grouping by Pacific standards and were certainly the largest the Americans had encountered thus far. The American offensive began on June 15, 1944. Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner directed the invasion force to land at 0542 hours. By 0700, landing craft were already heading towards the shores. At 0840, the first contingent arrived on the beaches. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions came ashore on the western side of Saipan, facing intense fire from Japanese guns and mortars situated on the elevations above the landing areas. The Marines pressed ahead inland, meeting powerful resistance. By night's end on the 15th, there were 20,000 American frontline soldiers established ashore. Equipment and materiel streamed onto the beachheads. Included among these assets were M4 Sherman medium tanks that landed from LST ships, advancing to bolster the infantry. The Marines held a beachhead, though full security had not yet been established. Japanese artillery continued to target the shorelines. Counteroffensives persisted throughout the night.